What's the worst year to be alive? Not 2020, not the Great Depression. Try a time when your street reeked of rotting corpses, your bread was made with sawdust, and the best entertainment in town was watching someone be burned alive. Let's go there. History loves to talk about kings, castles, and grand battles. But the truth? Most people who lived in the past weren't warriors or royalty. They were survivors in a world that wanted them dead. Your streets were open sewers. Eurygos. Food could kill you, and if the disease or hunger didn't finish you off, the crowd might gather to watch your execution like it was Saturday night entertainment. This isn't the history from school textbooks. This is the side of the past where life was short, death was slow, and suffering wasn't hidden. It was a public spectacle. Today, we're stepping into that world. From the filth that poisoned your body, to the hunger that stripped away your dignity, to the cruelty that turned pain into a stage performance. By the end, you'll understand why surviving even a single year in the Middle Ages was a miracle. Chapter 1. The Stench of Survival. You open your eyes to the gray light of morning, but the first thing that hits you isn't the cold. It's the smell. Thick, sour, and heavy. It seeps through the cracks in your wooden shutters, clinging to your clothes and hair. It's not the smell of something gone wrong. It's the smell of everything working exactly as it always does. The stench of your world. You pull yourself from the straw mattress, brushing away whatever fleas spent the night feasting on you, and step into the single narrow lane that serves as your street. There's no surprise in what you see, because it's the same every day. Heaps of rotting food, piles of dung, human and animal, flowing slowly down the gutter that runs between the houses. Somewhere in that mess is the bloated corpse of a stray dog, its hide twitching with the movement of flies. This isn't the aftermath of disaster. This is the city. In this age, there are no underground sewers, no garbage collections, no neat stone drains to carry the waste away. Every bit of refuse, human, animal, or otherwise, stays here until it rains enough to wash it into the river. And when that happens, the river doesn't cleanse the filth. It becomes part of it. The water you drink tomorrow will carry the dirt and blood from the butcher's stalls, the harsh chemicals from the tanner's pits, and the frothing suds from the washerwomen's buckets. It is impossible to escape. Even in your own home, the way. Smell creeps in through every crack, a constant reminder that disease is never more than a breath away. You can try to hold your nose, but eventually you have to breathe. And when you do, you inhale the same fetid air that carries invisible killers. Tiny things no one has the knowledge to name, but which everyone knows can end you by nightfall. Rats thrive here. Their slick black shapes dart between the piles of refuse, their bellies fat from the constant feast. They carry fleas, and the fleas carry plague. It's a silent army, moving freely from the streets to the market stalls, to the homes where food is stored in barrels and sacks. No lock, no wall, no barrier can keep them out. Some believe the answer is to keep clean, but bathing is dangerous, or so the common wisdom goes. Warm water is said to open the pores of the skin, inviting the poisoned air to seep in and rot you from the inside. Those who wash too often are seen as courting death. So instead, people wear their sweat and smoke and grime like a second skin, built up layer by layer until it becomes part of them. The rich, with their silks and velvets, do not escape it. They simply mask it, drowning themselves in perfumes and scented oils. The smell is still there, lurking beneath the roses and spices. The poor have no such luxury. They carry their odors openly, mixed with the musk of the animals they live alongside. In this world, parasites are constant companions. Lice crawl through hair, hidden beneath caps and coifs. Fleas leap from the bodies of sleeping children to the ankles of their parents. Bed bugs scatter when straw bedding is shaken out in the morning. Each bite is a tiny wound, a possible invitation to sickness. But no one panics over a rash or a boil. They are too common for that. You don't ask if it's dangerous. You simply hope it isn't. Disease doesn't strike here like a sudden storm. It moves in cycles, a grim tide that ebbs and flows. Dysentery, typhus, cholera, they are part of life's rhythm, returning again and again like the changing seasons. People speak of them the way you might speak of the harvest: expected, inevitable. You may see a neighbor laughing in the market at midday, only to watch their body loaded into a handcart before nightfall, shrouded in a rough blanket, destined for a pit beyond the city walls. The carts never stop for long. Each day they rattle through the streets, their wooden wheels splashing through the gutters, the smell of the dead mingling with the smell of the living. There is no dignity in dying here. No matter your wealth, your body is just another hazard, to be removed before it spreads more sickness. The stench is not just in the streets, it's in your lungs, your clothes, your food. When you lift a cup of ale to your lips, the scent of decay still lingers in your nostrils. When you break bread, you do it while swatting away the flies that come from the same piles where the rats feed. Even moments of joy are never pure. A wedding feast smells faintly of the tanner's pit next door. A newborn's first cry is accompanied by the buzz of flies in the eaves. Fresh air is a privilege only the countryside can provide, and even there it is fleeting. The wind can shift at any moment, bringing the city's breath over the fields. For those trapped within the walls, the only time the air changes is after a heavy rain, and even then, it carries the earthy tang of washed-up waste. Survival here is not just about finding food or avoiding the wrong crowd. It's about living in a constant, silent negotiation with the filth around you. You learn to read its warnings: the sweet, cloying smell of rot that means an animal has died nearby, the acrid sting of chemical runoff from the tanners that can burn your throat, the faint, almost metallic tang that clings to the air when sickness is near. Sometimes the smell is the only signal you get before someone in your household collapses, and collapse they will. When sickness comes, it doesn't care for rank or reputation. The rich may hide behind high walls, but the air is patient. It seeps through stone and under doors. A merchant's gold can buy stronger perfumes, better wine, softer bedding, but it cannot buy a breath of truly clean air. Every day you survive is another day in the shadow of the next outbreak. There are no official warnings, no doctors who can cure what's coming. You only know it has arrived when the carts grow heavier and the prayers grow louder. Some cling to charms and relics, convinced they will keep the sickness away. Others turn to the church, kneeling in air thick with the smell of tallow candles and unwashed bodies, hoping the saints will show mercy. Mercy rarely comes. The truth is, survival here is not a guarantee. It's a delay. Everyone knows someone who was taken too soon, their body marked not by a soldier's blade but by fever, by coughing fits, by the sudden violent purging of a sickness that gives no time for goodbyes. And yet, life goes on. Children play in the streets where the carts passed hours before. Merchants call out prices over the drone of flies. Lovers meet in the shadows of alleyways, stepping around puddles that are not rainwater. It is a world where death and life walk side by side, bound together by the same choking air. And as you breathe it in, you wonder not if it will kill you, but when. Some nights, when the air is still and the noise of the city fades, you catch yourself imagining another place. One where the streets are clean, the rivers run clear, and the only smell is that of fresh bread or blooming flowers. But that place is a dream, and dreams are dangerous. They make you forget how quickly reality can turn. And in this reality, the smell never truly leaves. It follows you into your sleep, into your thoughts, into the marrow of your bones. It is the signature of your time, the mark of the age you live in. The stench of survival is the scent of the medieval world itself. Rank, unrelenting, and always just one breath away from ending you. And yet, as you will see, this is only the beginning. For beyond the filth and the stench lies a far greater danger, one that will not just sicken you but break you, body and spirit alike. Chapter 2: Hunger Without Mercy. If the stench of decay was the constant background of medieval life, hunger was the slow drumbeat that dictated its rhythm. Where disease could strike in days and end a life by nightfall, hunger was patient. It crept in, taking strength first, then dignity, and finally breath itself. In a world without industrial farms, refrigerated storage, or global trade, food was not a certainty. It was a prize wrestled from the soil and sky, and both could turn against you without warning. A bad harvest could be ruin enough. One month the granaries might seem full, and the next, a stretch of cold rain could rot the grain in the fields. A summer drought might parch the soil until it cracked like broken pottery. Sometimes it was not weather, but the living swarms that brought ruin. Clouds of locusts that blotted out the sun, their wings filling the air with a dry whisper before they descended and stripped every green leaf from the land. Whatever the cause, the result was the same. The thin thread holding a community together would fray to breaking. For most people, life was lived on the edge of that thread. The peasant farmer, tilling a few strips of land, depended entirely on the yield from those fields. A good year meant bellies were full in winter and seeds could be set aside for spring. A bad year meant fear at first, then desperation, and finally the resignation of the starving. There was no supermarket to restock, no storehouse of surplus, hidden away. What little was stored could be stolen in the night, spoiled by damp or eaten by rats. Even the grain meant for planting might be ground into flour and baked into bread, not because anyone wanted to, but because hunger did not wait for next season's sowing. As crops failed, ingenuity became a cruel necessity. Bread dough might be bulked out with whatever could be ground to powder. Acorns, chestnuts, dried weeds, even bark peeled from trees. The most desperate added sawdust, not for flavor or nutrition, but to trick the stomach into feeling full. These famine breads might keep a body moving for a few days more, but they offered no true sustenance, grinding away at the intestines and leaving people weaker with each meal. Meat was a rarity for the poor. A hen might be kept for eggs, a pig, fattened for a winter slaughter, but these were precious resources, not to be eaten lightly. A family might taste pork only during the deepest winter celebrations, if the year had been good. In lean times, animals were often sold rather than eaten, traded away for grain to keep children alive. Most days, meals consisted of coarse bread, a thin gruel of oats or barley, and perhaps a few beans or peas boiled into soup. Fresh vegetables were scarce in winter, and fruits were a seasonal luxury, eaten in summer or preserved in honey if one could afford it. The wealthy fared better, their tables set with roasted meats, imported spices, and fruits from far-off lands. Yet even wealth could not banish hunger entirely. In the grip of famine, prices soared to impossible heights. Grain that had been affordable a month before might now cost 10 times as much. Nobles might hoard their supplies, guarding their larders against the desperate, but they too could find themselves short if an entire region's harvest failed. Gold could not conjure bread from empty fields. When the hunger deepened, it stripped away more than strength. It stripped away dignity. Chroniclers wrote of people boiling strips of leather torn from old harnesses, softening them into something chewable. Bones were dug from fresh graves, cracked open for the marrow within. In the forests, people searched for edible roots, mushrooms, and leaves, often eating plants that bloated the stomach without providing any nourishment. The body would swell grotesquely while still wasting away from within. The Great Famine of the early 14th century was one of the cruelest examples. Across much of Europe, rains fell unending for months, drowning crops in the fields and turning roads into rivers of mud. Grain rotted before it could be harvested, and hay for the animals was ruined. Without feed, cattle died in their stalls, sheep and goats starved in the pastures. In villages, people whispered of neighbors vanishing into the woods, never to return. Parents, unable to feed their children, abandoned them at monastery gates or left them in the care of strangers. In some cases, they left them in the forest, hoping perhaps they might find berries or mercy from passing travelers. Travelers themselves fared little better. The roads were lined with the bodies of those who had set out in search of food and collapsed along the way. Entire hamlets emptied as survivors fled toward cities, hoping to find grain there, only to find that the cities too were hungry. In crowded markets, the starving eyed one another with suspicion and despair. Riots broke out when shipments of grain arrived, the crowd surging forward in a frenzy that sometimes left the weakest trampled underfoot. Hunger, unlike plague, gave no clear boundary between the living and the doomed. A sick man might know he was dying within a day. The starving might linger for weeks or months, each day a little slower, each step a little heavier. It clouded the mind, making thoughts sluggish. It gnawed at the will until all that remained was the dull ache in the belly and the faint hope that tomorrow might bring food. Those too weak to move often lay where they fell, at the side of the road in the corner of a hut, until life slipped away unnoticed. Even when the famine ended, it left scars. Survivors often bore the marks of malnutrition for life, stunted growth, crooked bones, weakened immune systems. Families might never recover the land or tools they had sold in desperation. Orphans filled the streets, too many for monasteries to care for. In some regions, famine was followed by plague, as weakened bodies fell easy prey to disease. For those who lived through such seasons, hunger was not a rare misfortune. It was part of the cycle of life, as certain as winter's frost. Planting. In spring brought hope, but that hope was tempered by the knowledge that any misstep by man or nature could undo it all. A missed rain, an untimely frost, a raid by soldiers, or a pestilence among animals could bring the shadow of hunger back again. It was never gone, only waiting. In this way, hunger was a teacher as well as a killer. It taught caution, frugality, and the value of every crumb. It taught the cruelty of dependence on forces beyond one's control, and it taught that in the medieval world, survival was not guaranteed, even for the strong. Each meal was a small victory in a war that could never truly be won. In the villages, there were years when the harvest was good, the barns were full, and the larders stocked. Those years were remembered with a kind of wistful disbelief, spoken of in the same breath as births and marriages. But even in those good years, no one forgot the bad ones. The memory of empty bowls and gnawing hunger lingered in the mind, a quiet warning that fortune could change with the wind. When hunger finally loosened its grip, when the fields turned green again and the markets filled with bread, the people did not rejoice with the ease of modern celebrations. They approached the food with reverence, knowing how close they had come to losing everything. And somewhere deep inside, they knew they would face it again. For hunger was not an intruder in their world. It was a constant presence, a shadow that followed them from birth to death. It waited behind every poor harvest, every harsh winter, every act of war that trampled the fields. It waited when the rats found the grain stores, when a merchant ship sank in a storm, when frost clung to the soil in late spring. It waited in the silence of the empty pantry and in the tight-lipped glances between parents who had no bread for their children. And when it came, it asked no questions and showed no mercy. In this, hunger was perhaps the truest ruler of the medieval world, not king or pope, not noble or knight, but the invisible master that bent all to its will. Chapter 3. Pain as Entertainment. Starvation hollowed the body and filth poisoned the blood. Public cruelty finished the work by breaking the spirit. It is tempting to think that human suffering was something people once tried to avoid seeing, a private matter hidden from the crowd. But in many centuries past, pain was not hidden. It was paraded. It was arranged. It was the main event of this week. In the medieval and early modern world, punishments were not carried out behind prison walls or in quiet chambers. They unfolded in the open air on platforms in city squares, at the crossroads where roads converged, or on the hills where gallows could be seen from miles away. These were not merely sentences, they were performances. The executioner was not a shadowy figure. He was a public servant, instantly recognizable, a man whose work was as visible as the market traders. The condemned were not marched in at dawn and quickly dispatched. They were displayed, forced to endure long walks through jeering crowds, sometimes with signs around their necks declaring their crimes. Torture itself was an official part of the judicial process in many regions. Truth, it was believed, could be coaxed out of the human body through unbearable pain. The rack, for example, was a simple yet horrifying device. Its cranks slowly stretched the limbs until joints popped, ligaments tore, and muscles split. The victim did not always die from this, but many left the rack permanently crippled. The strappado was no less cruel. The accused's hands were tied behind their back, a rope looped over a beam, and they were hoisted into the air before being suddenly dropped. The shock tore shoulders from their sockets. Smaller devices inflicted damage more intimate but no less permanent. The thumbscrew crushed digits until nails split and bones cracked. The boot, an iron or wooden frame tightened around the leg, splintered the shin bones. These tools did not just punish. They left visible marks that served as living proof of guilt, whether the accused had been guilty or not. But torture was only the prelude. Executions themselves were carefully choreographed events. Once sentence was passed, word spread quickly, through the town. People traveled miles to witness the end. Parents brought children to teach them a lesson. Merchants saw an opportunity and sold food and drink to the assembled crowds. It was not uncommon for public executions to be scheduled for days when markets or fairs would already draw large numbers, ensuring a good audience. Some executions were designed to be swift, a single swing of an axe for beheading, or a drop-through, the gallows trapdoor. But others were drawn out for maximum display. Burning at the stake, a punishment often reserved for heretics, was not an instantaneous death. Victims could suffer for long minutes or even hours depending on the placement of the flames and the dampness of the wood. The smell of burning flesh mingled with smoke, a sensory memory that spectators carried home. Hanging could be made slower still. In some cases, the rope was short, ensuring that the condemned would strangle rather than have their neck broken. They might kick and gasp for many minutes, their faces turning colors while the crowd watched. Drawing and quartering, a punishment for high treason, was designed to strip away any semblance of dignity. First, the condemned was hanged until nearly dead, then cut down, disemboweled, and their organs burned before their eyes. The body was then divided into pieces and displayed in different parts of the kingdom as a warning. These punishments were not merely about justice. They were acts of theater serving political and religious agendas. A rebel leader executed publicly sent a message to any who might follow. A so-called heretic burned in the town square reinforced the authority of the church. Even theft, if it was brazen or repeated, could bring about public whipping or mutilation of the hands, ensuring that the accused would forever carry a visible sign of their crime. The psychological effect on the crowd was complex. For some, the sight of agony inspired fear and obedience, which was exactly the intent of the authorities. For others, it became a form of morbid entertainment. People might cheer when a particularly hated criminal was punished or jeer at their pleas for mercy. Children too young to fully understand learned early that the pain of others was a public matter. In this way, cruelty was normalized, even ritualized. In a time without theaters for the common people, without printed novels to read, without moving pictures to distract, these events were the stories that bound communities together. Just as a feast brought neighbors to the same table, an execution brought them to the same scaffold. They shared the same spectacle, the same conversation afterward, the same lingering images in their minds. Even the condemned played their part. A prisoner who met death with bravery might be remembered almost as a folk hero, particularly if their cause was seen as righteous by some portion of the crowd. Others broke down completely, pleading with the executioner, confessing every sin in the hope of divine mercy. Their cries and confessions were repeated in taverns and kitchens for weeks afterward. The cruelty was not limited to those found guilty of great crimes. Minor offenses could lead to public humiliation designed to degrade rather than kill. The stocks and pillory held offenders in place for hours or days while passers-by threw rotten food, mud, or worse. Whippings were carried out in the open, the victim tied to a post or cart and paraded through the streets while a lash tore at their back. Each strike was counted, each gasp of pain witnessed. And then, there were the spectacles that blurred the line between justice and pure cruelty. In certain times and places, animals were used as part of the punishment, dogs set upon prisoners, or bulls released into arenas where the condemned had no hope of survival. The boundary between execution and blood sport vanished entirely. For the ruling powers, such displays reinforced their control. For the church, they could be framed as moral lessons, the physical destruction of the sinner symbolizing the cleansing of their soul, if, that is, the soul was deemed worth saving. For the crowd, it was an occasion, a break from the rhythm of toil, hunger, and filth. If you lived in such an age, you could not escape it. To refuse to watch might mark you as suspicious or disloyal. To speak out against the cruelty could put you in the very place you condemned. And so people came. They watched. They returned to their homes, and they spoke of what they had seen. In the process, the line between justice and cruelty blurred until it disappeared entirely. In the end, the cruelty of the scaffold and the square was not an aberration. It was part of the fabric of life. As natural as the stench of the gutters and the ache of an empty stomach, public pain was simply another truth of existence. And for the countless souls who found themselves on the wrong side of the rope, the stake, or the blade, the only escape from the spectacle was to become its final act. We like to imagine the past as romantic, knights in shining armor, candlelit feasts, and noble quests. But for most people, history wasn't a story. It was a sentence to filth, hunger, and cruelty, with no chance of appeal. If you survived all three, you weren't lucky. You were a rare exception in a world built to break you. And that's just one glimpse into how horrifying the human story can be. If you think this was bad, wait until you see what came next. Click here to watch another chapter of history you were never meant to know.